Think back to 1994. The United States hosted a World Cup for the very first time, and somehow, a country that had always kept soccer at arm's length fell completely in love with the game. Stadiums that were never built for football were packed wall to wall. Brazil won the whole thing on penalties in a final, played under the blazing California sun. And the tickets, even for the biggest matches, were something an ordinary family could actually afford. $25, $50, $400 at the absolute most for the best seat in the house. That was 32 years ago. And this week, something happened that no World Cup has ever triggered before. The Attorneys General of New York and New Jersey, two of the most senior consumer protection officials in the entire country, issued formal subpoenas to FIFA, the governing body of world football, over its ticketing practices for the 2026 World Cup. New York Attorney General Letitia James and New Jersey Attorney General Jennifer Davenport used words like fake scarcity, confusion, and sky-high prices. They said fans had been misled about the very seats they were paying for. California had already asked FIFA for information weeks earlier, and across the Atlantic, a formal complaint filed with the European Commission by Football Supporters Europe and the consumer group Euroconsumers had been sitting in Brussels since March, accusing FIFA of abusing its monopoly position over ticket sales. 2 continents, multiple legal jurisdictions, millions of fans. 13 days before the tournament begins. This is the story of how the 2026 World Cup arrived at this moment, and what it means for the game so many of us have been watching our whole lives. Let's start with the numbers, because the numbers tell a story of their own. When Qatar hosted the 2022 World Cup, a fan could buy the cheapest ticket to the final for around $450. Expensive, sure, but manageable for the most devoted supporters. For 2026, that same category of final ticket starts at $4,185, 7 times the price. Not adjusted for inflation, not adjusted for distance, not accounting for anything at all. Simply 7 times more expensive than it was 4 years ago. For the full journey, following your team from the group stage all the way through to the final, Football Supporters Europe calculated that a fan would need a minimum of nearly $7,000 in tickets alone. And that figure doesn't include flights, doesn't include hotels, doesn't include food, and doesn't include the very real cost of getting between host cities spread across a country the size of a continent. FIFA's answer to every piece of that criticism has been 2 words: dynamic pricing. This is the same system airlines and hotels use, where prices rise and fall in real time based on demand. When it works in your favor, you catch a bargain. When it doesn't, you find yourself staring at a $1,000 seat for a group stage match between 2 teams you've never once seen at a World Cup before. Between October 2025 and April 2026, before most fans had even sorted out their travel plans, FIFA raised prices on more than 90 of the tournament's 104 matches. The 3 main ticket categories rose by an average of 34% in that window alone. As the tournament got closer, prices didn't ease. They climbed. And then came the seat location problem, which appears to be what finally pushed the authorities in New York and New Jersey over the line into formal legal action. Fans who had purchased tickets in a specific section of MetLife Stadium, the venue in East Rutherford, New Jersey, that will host 8 matches including the final, later discovered that FIFA had quietly added new ticketing zones after those purchases were already made. The result was that some buyers ended up with seats in worse locations than what they had originally been led to believe they were getting. The New York City Department of Consumer and Worker Protection described that conduct as blatantly deceptive. The joint statement from both attorneys general was direct and pointed. They said FIFA had turned buying a ticket to the World Cup into a gauntlet of confusion, fake scarcity, and impossibly high prices. They added that New Yorkers had been waiting years for the World Cup to come to their city, and that no one should be manipulated into paying sky-high prices for seats, and that fans should be able to trust that the tickets they purchase are the ones they actually receive. FIFA declined to comment on the investigation. Now, here's where things get interesting. FIFA's position throughout all of this has been one of extraordinary demand, and there's some real truth to that claim. In January, the organization reported that it had received 500 million ticket requests during a single 33-day application window. 500 million. That is a genuinely staggering number, the kind of figure that gets repeated at press conferences to make a point. FIFA President Gianni Infantino has described the 2026 tournament as the most anticipated in history. He has consistently pointed to demand as the justification for everything about the pricing structure. But a funny thing has happened in the months since those headlines. The resale market, usually the clearest real-world signal of genuine public appetite for a major event, has been softening in ways that seriously complicate that narrative. According to data from Ticket Club, group stage median listing prices dropped 28% between February and May, falling from an average of just over $1,200 to just under $1,000. Get-in prices fell too. The round of 32 softened by 25% over the same period. And then there are the extremes. Two data points at opposite ends of the scale that together say something important about this whole situation. On FIFA's own official resale marketplace, tickets to the final at MetLife Stadium have been listed at prices ranging from around $9,000 all the way up to just under $11.5 million. That is not a typo. $11.5 million for a single seat at a football match. The listing is real. Whether anyone is actually paying that price is a different question entirely. But the fact that that number exists on a FIFA-operated platform captures something about the atmosphere that is built up around this tournament's ticketing story. And then there is the other end of the scale. A ticket to the group stage match between Cape Verde and Saudi Arabia in Houston sold on the resale market for the equivalent of just under $7. Fees brought the total to around $8. The original face value had been listed at nearly $140. That ticket, that $7 World Cup ticket going viral on social media at the exact same moment that $11 million final seats are sitting on FIFA's own platform, tells you everything you need to know about the gap between what FIFA promised and what it has actually delivered. It's worth stepping back for a moment and asking a question that any lifelong football fan would naturally ask. Has FIFA ever faced anything like this before? The honest answer is no. Not at this scale, and not with this level of legal consequence. Previous World Cups have always generated some level of complaint about prices and access. The 2022 edition in Qatar drew significant criticism for its costs, for the logistics of a small country with limited infrastructure attempting to host millions of visitors, and for the far broader questions about how the tournament came to be awarded there at all. But there were no subpoenas. There were no attorneys general. There were no formal proceedings before the European Commission. What's different about 2026 is the combination of factors coming together at the same time. Dynamic pricing being applied to a sporting event of this magnitude for the very first time. A host country with a highly developed legal system and active, well-resourced consumer protection agencies that are willing to use their authority. Fan organizations in Europe that had already organized themselves well enough to file an 18-page complaint under competition law. And a tournament priced so far above any historical norm that the gap was simply impossible to explain with supply and demand alone. FIFA's own bid documents had projected an average ticket price of around $1,400. That figure has been left far behind. The European complaint is worth spending a moment on. Football supporters. Europe and Euro consumers didn't simply lodge a grievance. They identified 6 specific areas where they believe FIFA abused its dominant market position. They cited the price increase from Qatar's final ticket to 2026's final ticket, 7 times the cost. They challenged the 15% commission FIFA charges on its own resale marketplace, meaning that a fan selling an $800 ticket through FIFA's platform would see FIFA collect an additional $120 on top of the original sale price on a ticket that FIFA had already sold once. They demanded that FIFA publish, at least 48 hours before each ticket sales window opened, exactly how many tickets remained in each category, and precisely where those seats sit inside the stadium. The European Commission acknowledged receipt of the complaint and said it would review the case. That review is ongoing, but the legal exposure for FIFA is no longer simply reputational. It's structural. The executive director of Football Supporters Europe put it plainly when he said that FIFA leaves devoted fans with no real choice. Either you pay the exorbitant prices or you miss out entirely. That framing captures something real about what a monopoly position over a global sporting event actually means in practice. What does all of this feel like for the people who actually play the game? Because that dimension of the story sometimes gets lost entirely in the numbers. Professional footballers generally don't comment on ticket prices. That's not their world. Their world is preparation, tactics, fitness, and performance. But ask any player who grew up in a household where the World Cup was a shared event. A thing you watched with your family around a television, talked about at school for weeks, dreamed about from the time you were old enough to kick a ball, and they'll tell you the same thing. The tournament means something far beyond the football itself. It connects generations. It connects communities. And access to it in some form, the sense that it belongs to ordinary people, is part of what gives it the kind of power no other sporting event on earth can quite match. When fan groups use the language of betrayal, that's the tradition they're defending. Not the idea that tickets should be cheap for the sake of it, but the idea that a World Cup should feel, at some level, like it belongs to the people who grew up with this game. Not exclusively to the corporate hospitality tier. Not only to those who can afford to spend several $1,000s before they've even booked a flight. Andy Bass, a board member of a London-based supporters group, put it plainly when he said that very few people outside hardcore supporters are even considering attending. That sentence from someone whose literal job is to help fans follow football around the world carries real weight. There's also the atmosphere question. Ask anyone who has actually attended a World Cup what they remember most, and it's rarely a single goal or a single result. It's the color, the noise, the mix of people from everywhere on Earth packed into the same space, singing in languages you don't understand, but understanding exactly what every word of it means. That atmosphere is created by fans who traveled on a budget, who saved for years, who wore their country's shirt from the moment they left home. If those fans can't afford to be there, something changes inside those stadiums. It's subtle, but it's real, and you feel it, even watching from thousands of miles away on television. So, where does this actually go from here? What can realistically happen between now and July 19th? The honest answer is that the legal proceedings themselves are unlikely to change anything about this particular tournament. An investigation by 2 state attorneys general will take time. The European Commission complaint will take considerably longer. Neither one is going to result in FIFA being ordered to lower its prices before the final whistle sounds in East Rutherford. The tournament will go ahead. The matches will be played. And for FIFA, financially, 2026 is shaping up to be the most lucrative World Cup in history by a significant margin. But there are things that could still shift. FIFA showed some degree of responsiveness earlier in the year when it introduced a $60 supporter entry tier distributed through national associations, after the initial backlash that erupted in December. Critics pointed out that this tier represented less than 1% of total stadium capacity per team, a meaningful gesture that reached a fraction of the people who actually needed it. New York City separately announced a small lottery offering 1,000 discounted tickets at $50 each for city residents, with public transportation included. These were real steps, but steps that reached only the edges of the problem. What the investigations now accomplish is something more durable. They create a formal record. They establish official documentation of what was promised versus what was actually delivered. They put FIFA on notice, in writing, with legal weight behind it, that its practices are being examined under consumer protection law, not merely judged in the court of public opinion. Any future World Cup bid, any future pricing structure, any future application of dynamic pricing to a global tournament will now have to account for the precedent being set right now in the offices of Letitia James and Jennifer Davenport, in the consumer protection agencies of California, and in the commission buildings of Brussels. The bigger question, and it's one worth actually sitting with, is what kind of tournament this turns out to be inside the stadiums themselves. The resale market softening suggests that some seats may prove harder to fill than the headline demand figures implied. If there are visible gaps in the stands during group stage matches, that will register. On a global television broadcast that reaches billions of people, an empty stadium speaks for itself. It's a story that tells itself without a single word of commentary. FIFA's commercial success in 2026 is not in doubt. The organization is on track to generate around $13 billion in revenue, Broadcast rights deals will produce extraordinary numbers. The scale of the event, spread across 16 cities in 3 separate countries, is genuinely without historical precedent. The infrastructure and the ambition are real, but the World Cup has always been something else alongside all of that business. It has been a reminder that football, at its heart, belongs to the people who grew up with it, who learned it in the street, who watched it through crackling television signals on the other side of the world, who still feel something shift inside them when the opening ceremony begins, however old they are, however many tournaments they have lived through. The question being asked right now, in courtrooms, in commission offices, on fan forums and comment sections, is whether FIFA crossed a line with the way it approached the 2026 ticketing. There's a serious argument that the organization had the demand to justify the prices, that the market functioned more or less as intended, and that the World Cup will still be extraordinary regardless of all of this. And there's an equally serious argument that something real was broken in the relationship between FIFA and the fans who have always been this tournament's foundation, the people who made it what it is in the first place. Both of those arguments have genuine weight. Both of them can be true at the same time. And that tension, between the extraordinary commercial success and the sense that something essential was lost in the transaction, might be the most honest description of where we actually stand today. In 13 days, the football starts. And when it does, a lot of this noise will fade into the background. Matches will be played, goals will be scored. There will be moments that none of us will forget. Someone will do something on a pitch in Los Angeles or New Jersey or Mexico City that reminds you exactly why you've been watching this game your entire life. The tournament will deliver what the tournament always delivers. That part is not really in question. But the conversation that began this week in courtrooms and commission offices and fan forums across 2 continents is not going to disappear when the first whistle blows. It's going to shape how the next World Cup is planned, how tickets are sold, what disclosures are required, what legal frameworks apply to a global governing body operating on American soil, and ultimately, whether the people who run this sport decide that the fans who love it most, the ones who have built everything that FIFA sells, deserve to be treated with something more than a tiered dynamic pricing structure. 2026 is already a tournament unlike any other before a single ball has been kicked. What it becomes after the final whistle is the story still being written.